The views discussed in this conversation are the views of individuals and not of Arrington Capital. This podcast is provided solely for informational purposes and is not financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. The participants of this podcast are not recommending any particular security, protocol, token, financial instrument, or other tradable asset or any investment strategy. It is not offering to sell or soliciting to buy any security or asset.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pirate Pod. I'm super excited about today's conversation with Sergey Gorbunov from Axelar. I want to get into the whole Axelar story, Sergey's background. Here at Arrington Capital, we're big believers and holders of Axelar tokens. We think they're at the forefront of what's going on in cross-chain communications. And we see more and more developers really using their platform for interoperability. It's proof of stake, it's decentralized. They've really built a complete experience where the interactions that any application comes with can flow seamlessly across any asset, any smart contract, any chain, any application. I think they're currently supporting over 70 chains, and I want to get more into that and bringing the vision to life. And also want to dive in on some of the news this week. There's an ETF that's been filed. They have new board members who are very impressive. And before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about Sergey and his background. And Sergey, if you don't come out with it, I will do it for you. I've known Sergey for 7 or 8 years now. Not to make this about me, but Sergey was very gracious in schooling me on all things crypto back in the very, very early days of Algorand. And I'm excited to be here and learning from him again. So Sergey, for those who don't know you well, give a little bit of your background and how you got here and why you're doing Axelar now.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Kelly. Excited to chat. It's been a while. But yeah, so my background is, technology originally, coming out from academia. I did PhD at MIT. I've been working a lot in distributed systems, cryptography. I was a faculty at the University of Waterloo, running a research group there, and then took a leave to, build startups and, products that make an impact. As you mentioned, we worked on the Algorand project together with an amazing team, and I helped to launch that and design a lot of the primitives behind it. And after Algorand, it was pretty clear that we are just entering the multi-chain world, right? You see an explosion of chains, explosion of protocols, explosion of assets across different ecosystems, and it's pretty clear that we need kind of a more unified way to interact across all of that. Right. It is confusing. It is complicated. It's a very fragmented experience. We started Axelar to solve that problem. It's been, 4.5 years or so since we started the project, and the network has been operational and live for 2.5 years. It's fully decentralized and autonomous interoperability stack, and we can dive into that. The goal is to just help simplify both developer and user experiences in Web3, which are very fragmented, and I think only continues to get worse as the stack scales horizontally.
Thanks for the intro. Your doctoral dissertation at MIT won awards, so downplaying the background there, but Sergey is probably one of the best minds in cryptography that we have here today. I know I get the story of the Algorand experience and lack of liquidity and bridging and opportunities there. How did that translate to the broader ecosystem of crypto back in 2020? And what do you think has changed since you started Axelar versus now?
I mean, I think, in 2020, when we were starting out, the thesis that there's going to be, a lot of different blockchain stacks was untested, right? I think, as at that time, everybody wanted to be the technical stack where everything gets built. Right. And so I think even as we were starting Axelar, a lot of the L1s and chains themselves, they wanted interoperability, but I literally got comments from some of the founders, but not too much, don't give us too much interoperability. Give us one-way interoperability.
What does too much mean? What does too much mean? They'll go somewhere else. They won't be using anything that team has put out. What does too much mean?
No, so some people wanted very explicit, some chains to be connected to them, but not others.
Got it.
Some teams wanted to prioritize inflow of liquidity versus outflow of liquidity, right? And things like that. So, kind of try to really build the lock-in effect around chains themselves, right? And the ecosystems. And I think that changed, right? That really, really changed over the few years since we started the project in 2020. Where people started to come to us and say, okay, give us as much as you can of interoperability, right? And the more chains you can connect, the easier it is to connect those chains, the easier you can streamline the asset onboarding, the better it is for us. Because I think a lot of the projects and a lot of the chains really started to find more of a, product market fit, right? So some chains started to find product market fit around gaming, some more about institutional adoption, some more as like early stage playgrounds for, meme coins or whatnot, right? And that really verticalization of aspects, I think, continues to happen in the space. And then, in that ecosystem, if you have some type of a product market fit for your chain, of course, you need to bring users in, you need to facilitate smooth experiences. And so, the better you can have interoperability across your stack, the easier it is for developers and users to onboard it. So
Do you think that
Mhm.
everybody recognizes that? Do you think that most successful projects in the space are at the point of like any interconnectivity points are the more the better, bring it on?
I think chains themselves recognize it quite well, right? So a lot of the chains really come to us and want to have integration as fast as possible. We have a pretty big list of integrations. Not all asset issuers still understand what interoperability means for them, right? So things like stablecoins, things like RWAs. I think there's just understanding how wonderful they could simplify all of that if they had interoperability under the hood.
So that's a good pivot point. Let's get into more of what Axelar is doing to make all those things possible, because I think you're doing a lot in terms of the retail and then the assets and what that means for institutions and beyond. So if you're connecting, I think you're supporting 70 chains now, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
That includes XRP, Solana, Stack, Sui. It's not just EVM chains, not just Cosmos chains, it's all over the place. And you've got a little bit of a focus on institutions and real world assets. And you just mentioned asset issuers. Some of those are more heavily focused on certain chains over others. How are you thinking about that? And then I guess also, how are you thinking about the needs of institutions, whether that's asset issuers or people that need liquidity or want cross-chain communications versus retail? And, you brought up meme tokens and more of the retail-based products.
Yeah, so let me start with retail and then maybe switch to institutions. So retail wants to access applications from their wallet very easily, right? Like that's the biggest use case that we have seen where, you have a wallet today. If you connect to one chain, it displays certain assets. If you want to interact with these assets in an application like a DEX, NFT launchpad, meme coin launchpad, whatever that is on another chain, you don't want to have to be bridging. You don't want to have to be switching wallets. You don't want to have to think about a fragmented liquidity of your assets across those chains. So you want to unify all of that. And so this is where interoperability helps, right? It allows you to have a single interface like a wallet that all the token balances could be aggregated across chains. And then whatever blockchain you want to use under the hood, you can submit like one transaction and then have your assets being routed, deposited into that application directly. So we're still going through a transformation where the wallets need to embrace interoperability infrastructure. It hasn't happened yet, right? I think we're maybe about like 6 to 12 months for wallets to understand, or in that process, like they started about 6 to 12 months ago, but they're still going through this transition of aggregating balances across multiple chains, figuring out how do you submit transaction.
So do you have any insights on like which wallets are a little more ahead when it comes to that stuff?
I mean, which ones are ahead? There are newer startup wallets that are very good to be chain agnostic, but unfortunately, I think they're all smaller and there's, they're trying to fight MetaMask. And I think, MetaMask and, Ledger and some of the bigger ones, Coinbase wallet, have so much of the networking effects that I think they're, a little bit struggling. But, MetaMask is embracing the aggregation of portfolio, right? Like there is an aggregated view that they think they're starting to ship. It's not a front and center yet of the wallet. It's sort of a little bit hidden, but I think they're starting more and more there. I think, the end game is wallets like MetaMask and Coinbase, interact across chains very easily, which I think they're going through.
And will Axelar tie in directly there? I actually don't know how that looks from a wallet to the chain to the asset to Axelar. Where do those points happen when you come to wallet integrations?
Okay, great question. So there are multiple points, but let me give you like one simple example. So back to your other question. So one of the products or one of the services you can build on top of Axelar interoperability stack are tokens that live on all chains at the same time, right? So, it's called Interchain token service. Imagine you have a stable coin. Instead of having it launch on one chain and then figuring out like the bridging, you can go through our stack to launch that coin on, 70 plus chains. And then it's all interconnected. It has the same address. It has the same format, and you can send it back and forth seamlessly, right? Now, when we talk about send it back and forth seamlessly, that's where the wallets could come in. And so as a wallet, if you integrate on top of these tokens or our SDK, then you can say, okay, the user has 10 coins on Solana, 10 coins on Ethereum. If they want to deposit 20 in an application on, I don't know, Stellar as an example, the wallet can do seamless backend operations to aggregate 10 plus 10 from different chains and send one transaction to deposit 20 in the in the final application that the user cares about, right? So sort of aggregation from the tokens, making sure they're flowing as one unified liquidity to get to the user's action is where the intersection would come in for the token use case. And this is where the wallets still need to do a little bit of work on.
Makes sense. Can we talk about stablecoins on Axelar and what you see happening there? Stablecoin institutions are getting ready for these RWAs that can be spun up. How does that work? What does it matter for regulatory compliance? Connecting to private blockchains, public blockchains? How's Axelar fitting into that?
Yes, I think you probably know, but there is an actively ongoing discussion around stablecoin bill in Washington, right? And so we expect that to hit the public over the coming months. Everybody's very excited about it. So what that framework does, it allows people to really understand how to interact with a stablecoin, what security around stablecoin means, how to issue stablecoin. And so all that work that, early pioneers like, Circle had to do over the years without regulatory framework now would be very, very crystal clear. And so in the market, we're seeing just a flood of new stablecoin issuance being done by small and large projects. Right? There are effectively two ways to think about stablecoins, but the simplest one is that it's a settlement system and an asset that allows you to save on processing fees from legacy infrastructure like Swift or banking systems. Right? Do you see projects being announced by PayPal, by Robinhood, by Visa, by Ripple, and some of our partners? They're all talking about, either partnering with stablecoin issuers or launching their own stablecoins themselves and then using that stablecoin for backend settlement. Now, every time the stablecoin is issued, we talk with most of them. They're not asking us which chain to pick. They're saying, could you support 100 chains for me? Because I don't want to be on one chain. I want to be everywhere, right? And being everywhere means tapping into all the users across all the chains, aggregating all the wallets in some sense in one interface, and really managing the unified liquidity and unified experience for your users and, not being left out. For a lot of these projects, picking an ecosystem and saying, I'm going to bet my business, like imagine like Robinhood or PayPal saying like, hey, I'm going to bet my entire project on one chain, is just unacceptable, right? Activity comes and goes, ecosystems come and go, users come and go.
Yeah.
So you really want to be everywhere. And this is what, Axelar Stack allows to issue these coins.
So do you issue it right within Axelar?
Yeah, so you would issue it on top of Axelar Stack. So we have one product called Interchain Token Service. So if you go to interchain.axelar.dev, simple interface where you can specify all the chains you want to be asset on, click submit, and it automatically gets deployed. And under the hood, it uses the Axel network to secure all of these assets and manage the unified
And if you're making any changes or updates to that asset that you've issued, are you also doing that within Axelar and it's propagating to all the chains that you've put it out to?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So you can simplify really like your management, right? Where you don't have to go and update chain by chain, like do it 70 times. One transaction, you can hard code in your contract that just propagates it everywhere, does the upgrade automatically for you.
And why wouldn't anyone do that if that's the exposure it gives them?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the big questions, of course, is the regulatory side, right? It's not from the Axelar side itself, but for a lot of these issuers, like they need to understand what chains they want to be on, what chains they can be on, what does it mean to secure the assets under the hood. And so there's, some regulatory work and regulatory clarity that needs to happen for the fit of interoperability in all of this, right? And for fit of multi-chain. And this is actually one of the exciting, announcements that we announced this week, that Brian Brooks joined Axelar Foundation as one of the advisors, who is probably one of the leading figureheads in policymaking and institutional adoption. And so we're kind of working through that with him to really clarify the need of interoperability, how interoperability fits in the whole stack of multi-chain issuance of these stablecoin assets.
Awesome. What about multi-chain applications that are built right into Axelar with native cross-chain contracts? I believe you can also like create a smart contract, are you writing it on, is there an Axelar virtual machine? And then you deploy those across other instances in the same way you just walked through the stablecoin examples, and it propagates them all the way through. Is it literally that simple? Is it the same thing?
So you don't have to write it in Axelar, right? Like you write it in any, on any chains that you want, and Axelar can help you just propagate it, deploy it across multiple chains, and really connect your instances, right?
Okay.
So as an example, if you're doing like cross-chain borrowing and lending, you can have contracts deployed across all the 70 chains, through Axelar. You can have users do deposits on one chain, withdrawals on another chain. You can create, liquidity pool on a third chain or the same chain, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So probably the simplest way to think about it is that, on one chain like Ethereum, you have full composability between smart contracts, right? They can all talk to one another. So Uniswap can call, an NFT platform, and then you can like automate a function that would like do a swap and a deposit in some application. And so this is what cross-chain composability across contract allows you to do, is that you can almost think of them as living on the same chain and like have a full composability between them. So back to the institutions, we did some pilots where assets would live on one chain, but then an institution would have like a private chain where they want to do settlement, right? And then they would send a smart contract call from, public chain that would do the settlement of their portfolio in yet another chain. And so that's a generic smart contract call that allows them to automate multi-chain interactions.
What would you say the usage of Axelar, more institution or more retail-focused apps?
I mean, as of today, it's live usage is more retail-focused apps, but there's probably a bigger pipeline of, institutional or more regulatory use cases that we're seeing that is in the works, right? So we've done some work with JP Morgan, Apollo, Citi, MasterCard, a lot of those projects, a lot of the tokenization platforms as well. I think with regulatory clarity coming in the US, it really opens up the door for these institutions to start leveraging the stack. And I think that's what we're seeing being built on the back end right now.
Back to earlier, we were kind of talking about, there is an Axelar virtual machine, right?
Correct.
What does it do, and how are cross-chain contracts on that more interesting than just simple messaging processing?
Yeah, the primary purpose for building the virtual machine was twofold. One is to help us automate a lot of the integrations with chains themselves, right? So we have a very deep backlog of chains. And so before, to integrate those chains, you would have to implement certain logic at the network layer that would require like a network upgrade, potentially if it's a, more complicated chain to be integrated. And so we wanted to bring a lot of that functionality to be more accessible so people can integrate themselves in a plug and play approach, right? So that was one of the key points for launching the virtual machine at Axelar, and then creating the framework of smart contracts that's called Amplifier, where chains can integrate themselves and really streamline the process of onboarding new ecosystems. Right.
Wait, walk me through that. I'm not sure I'm following. So a chain, I'm, Keli chain, and I want to integrate with all the other things. I just I can come and go and plug into Axelar and bam, all done.
Exactly. Right. Like Axelar itself and the stack is an open ecosystem at this point. It's an open network. And so we don't want to have just service providers and vendors that are doing the integrations. We want to build an open ecosystem. So the analogy is that, the whole internet runs on TCP/IP, which is an open standard. And the reason it runs on TCP/IP and the open standard is because people can build their own protocols and their own integrations without having to ask anybody for permissions. And so when you look at a lot of competitors in the interoperability space, they're all like centralized solutions being orchestrated by individual vendors. And so you have to go and talk to the vendors, right? Like ask for interoperability, ask for too much, too little, whatever it is that you want. And so the Axelar and the open network allows you to come in and like plug in your changes following this framework. So you don't have to ask anybody. You can set up your own routes. You can set up your own connections. You can have, as much or as little interoperability as you want. So it's really an open stack and an open framework. And the virtual machine on top of Axelar and the Amplify framework built on top of it really allows us to do that. Right. There are the use cases of the virtual machine like that, it's used to be like a token hub that can manage all these tokens across multiple chains. You can use it for deployment of smart contract easier across it. So those are like additional functions that you can leverage from the virtual machine.
And this probably impacts some of your go-to-market also, right? Because it's not just it's a different story and a different narrative than sort of the usual ecosystem and community building, because there's so much more opportunity and you really are this unique infrastructure play where anyone can come from any different direction and go in and be connected in 1,000 more points, right?
Yeah, exactly. The way to think about it is that Axelar gives you a gateway to Web3, right? And so a lot of the institutions, a lot of the token issuers that we're talking about, they don't want to have to go and compare all the different chains, understand the trade-offs. They need very simple API. They need very simple access points. They need very simple distributions. And so Axelar is very uniquely, designed to do that. And the beauty of the virtual machine, and again, like some of the functions that you can do, is that it can really connect your off-chain systems and like institutional systems, and with some of the pilots that we're working with on-chain systems through this one single API and one simple interface, right? So you don't have to set up multiple wallets, manage your tokens across all the chains. Axelar stack, one API, one distribution, one access point, talk to all the ecosystems and all the chains and grow with them together.
Can anyone go and see the different private blockchains that assets are coming in and out of Axelar and going back to?
So in the live, no. I think the private ones that we've worked with, they're still in development by the institutions. I don't think they can launch unless that like stablecoin and like the market structure builds that we talk about are clear, which we expect to happen this year. Once those are clear, I think we're going to start seeing them convert, from testnets to mainnets.
Yeah. And are you seeing more activity with stuff that is net new, or is it more existing stuff that's trying to be more accessible, more cross-chain, more open and exposed?
Yeah, so in Web3 native projects, we've seen the biggest demand from what I would call like later phase projects that have like some product market fit, but they're looking to go cross-chain or multi-chain, right? So DYDX is a good example. They migrated into Cosmos ecosystem. We provided a lot of their interoperability support. You've seen that from Uniswap. So we're supporting them for some cross-chain development around governance initiatives. We're seeing that with a lot of the stablecoins that are crypto native, right? But the interesting point is that for these more institutional regulatory use cases, like interoperability is not an afterthought. It's a pre-launch product requirement. Right? Like I think that's why we're finding ourselves very early in those conversations. Like they do not want to go live and bet their whole business again on like one ecosystem. They want to be everywhere, and that's why we're finding ourselves working with many of them in very early phases.
Yep. And then decentralization. You said it right out of the gate earlier when we started, but how is Axelar more decentralized than some of the others, and why does that matter given the point that we're at in the infrastructure development phase of crypto?
I think the way that I view decentralization is that it's a security mechanism and it's a ecosystem expansion mechanism. When I say security, is that assets at the end of the day are protected by these networks. You want to make sure that the network that protects it has a lot of nodes, a lot of actors, a lot of geographic diversity, a lot of software diversity that jointly secures the network. If you look at all the hacks, including the Bybit hack from a couple of weeks ago, why was it hacked? Because there's a centralized entity that had a few keys, and people find a way to get access to those keys, right? In that case, those keys were behind the AWS deployments, but nonetheless, those like keys or API tokens that a centralized entity had. And so you can compromise and you can always break them. Security is only achieved through decentralization and diversification of software, deployment of practices and policies. And that's why it's very, very important. And so, a lot of the interoperability stacks are very, very centralized out there in the market. And that's, again, the result of why we've seen billions of dollars being hacked, right, in interoperability and like bridges over the years. Very few keys or software bugs and like very centralized operations. People exploit it. People steal the funds. So decentralization is very, very critical to provide security in the long term. But back to my second point is that decentralization open protocols allow ecosystem to be built organically around the stack, right? Where anybody can come in, anybody can now integrate to Axelar, extend it, grow, propose contributions, and we have like dozens of teams that are building their own connections at the protocol layer to the network. Right? We're helping them. We're answering some questions as one of the builders of those connections, but they're growing the ecosystem with us together. And I think the only way to do that is the underlying protocol is decentralized and open for participation, right? And it's not controlled by vendor. And all the interoperability stacks that we have seen over the history, including the history of the internet, that were controlled by the vendor didn't really scale. Right? Because one vendor can only do so much. They always have business constraints. too much interoperability, too little interoperability, those things create friction in the long term. And having an open network and open environment where that friction does not exist is the healthiest way to grow, connectivity stacks.
I was laughing listening to your security thing. You taught me about Faraday bags, purchasing computers directly from vendors in cash and transporting them and also air gapping them, and they never touch anything ever. So I am well aware of how seriously you take security. So it's great. I think it's also worth noting, can we talk a little bit about the Axelar token and the purpose of that when it comes to network security and decentralization?
Yeah, I mean, the token is really designed to power the network itself, right? So it's used as a security mechanism where validators are elected by the token holders to participate in the consensus. It's used to pay fees on the network. So every time there is a cross-chain message that goes from one network to the other, there's gas being paid to the network itself. That's now been burned as one of the recent upgrades that happened on the network. And the token is used to incentivize more and more connections as well and to reward participation of the validators. This amplifier framework that I mentioned, every time there is a new connection being made to it, it requires validators to be, rewarded in AXL, right? So there is a special reward pool that needs to be filled in by the community in order to reward the validators to support that new connection. So it's really designed as a utility token, as a mechanism to grow the ecosystem in a, healthy and organic way around all these interoperability functions.
And then we're sitting here Friday afternoon. I'm going to try and get this out quickly, but you've had a pretty banner week within the Axelar ecosystem. I think the new board member and Brian Brooks, you shared a little bit about that. Will your board continue to grow with figureheads that can really drive some change?
Yeah, so Brian joined on the advisory board to help the foundation really think through these regulatory changes, to think about institutional adoption. I'm very excited to have him again. Like he's one of the leading figures in the policy making. He was the chief legal officer at Coinbase, right? He also oversaw a lot of the currency initiatives at the government. Definitely, if and when it sort of makes sense, we'll bring in more people, right? Kind of keep on growing the adoption of the platform, our advisorship role. So I'll defer to more news on that over the coming weeks and months, but there's definitely going to be more exciting stuff.
Fantastic. And then it was also announced this week that Canary Capital filed to launch an ETF for Axelar. Exciting moment.
Yeah, exciting. Can't comment too much on that, but Canary Capital, is one of the leading institutions that really understands, ETFs. I think they worked with a couple other assets before, so
Awesome.
pretty stellar team.
And then walk us through what the next major milestones are that'll happen within the Axelar ecosystem. What can people expect over the next 6 to 12 months, the rest of, 2025?
A lot of big chain integrations are going live in various shapes and forms, right? So some of them have been announced that you mentioned, some of them will be announced soon. We have pretty big assets that we're working with and asset issuers themselves that will be launching using the Axelar stack. Yeah, I can't say what they are right now, but all these regulatory, stablecoin initiatives have been discussing large asset issuers going multi-chain. And so it'll be pretty exciting to see them using the Axelar stack.
Awesome. All right. Anything else you want to share, Sergey?
No, I think it's been great chatting. If people are looking for more info, you can go to axel.network. It's a good gateway to help you navigate across the ecosystem.
Fantastic. Sergey, thank you for joining me here today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.